Welcome to Die Hard on a Blank, the podcast where we explore the influence of Die Hard on action cinema, one action movie at a time. I'm Philip Gawthorne, and with me as always is Liam Billingham, and today's film is GoldenEye.
It's Die Hard in a Bond reboot. Ba-da-ba-da-ba-da-doo.
We have a special guest as well as the ubiquitous mouth trumpet that you like to wheel out for the Bond movies.
Sorry, I'll stop now.
We have a special guest all the way from the United Kingdom. It is an actor, writer, comic, and 007 aficionado. Ben Rufus Green is in the house. Welcome, Ben.
Hello, listeners.
Ben, you have to say Ben or Green. You have to do the Bond intro. You know, you have to say your name like you're James Bond.
Okay, so
right.
Would I say this? Because I've got a middle name though, Ben Rufus.
Yeah, you got to add that in there. That's part of it.
That's part of it. So the name's Green. Ben Rufus Green.
Yeah, there we go.
And I'm on to you, Blofeld. Okay.
Okay, now I feel in it. We're at the Baccarat table. I ordered a gin martini, no vodka. It's gross, but
so Ben, and I did struggle with the pronunciation of. I set myself a challenge by saying the word aficionado. It's actually a pretty difficult word to say. But you're a 007 fan. Is that fair?
Oh yeah, it was. I think like most people, watching the Bond films was how I kind of got into films. You know, they were always on. You kind of knew it was going to be a good fun time, and yeah, I've loved them from an early age. I had them all on VHS. I've got them all on. I've got some of them on American DVD, and I went to watch my GoldenEye, but it's I can't watch it now because my TV doesn't have a SCART lead in the SCART connection, so I had to buy it. But yes, I've loved them for years now. Absolutely love them all. Yeah.
A little birdie tells me that one of your favourites is On Her Majesty's Secret Service.
Yes,
which Liam loves.
Oh, I love it.
I'm obsessed with that movie. It's a masterpiece.
Yeah.
It's one of the Bond films that is an utter masterpiece. I totally agree.
Well, I came to that quite late because I deliberately avoided it because I thought it wasn't canon at the time, and then I saw it years. Not actually that long ago, and I was like, my God, this is amazing! I love the fight scenes. I really like Lazenby. I think he's brilliant in it, and
I agree.
I just love everything about it. The editing, the music, the direction. Yeah, it's my favorite one.
Yeah, it's funny. When I was a kid, I grew up in a Connery household. My dad was like a big Connery guy. We talked about this on the podcast before, but my dad's interest in James Bond started because JFK, Irish Catholic from Boston, like my father, mentioned that Ian Fleming was his favorite writer. So I grew up with the books, with the movies, and my dad, I rented On Her Majesty's Secret Service independently as a kid. And I was like, wow, that was really good. And my dad was like, nope, not watching that. That's a fake James Bond movie. I think that was like the common idea in the late 80s, early 90s. And I rewatched it during the pandemic, and I was like, wow, this is a legitimate action masterpiece. Directed by an editor, which I think is really, really significant.
One of the things I did like about the Bond films, I don't know if they do anymore, is you grow up in the Bond, like you become an editor, then you get to direct them, and then you direct a few movies. I don't think they don't do it anymore, do they? But for favourite Bond, okay, so I can't say Lazenby, so I'm going to cheat and put Connery and Moore first, then Lazenby, if that's all right. And then the others.
Oh wow! Okay.
The others are very close.
You rank him that high. That's really interesting.
Just because I love that film, just because I was so surprised at how good it was when I first watched it, and it's still with me. Just a slight stiffness coming on.
The joy of the Lazenby is we only get to imagine the movies that he would make later. Like we get one, and we never see him play. Bond again, and then it's more, and I would say the entire franchise shifts, right? Like, I mean, it's a completely reinvention of the series, for better or for worse. And I often think a lot about like what the movies would be like, and often the law of diminishing returns with Bond actors after they do their first Bond, and which is something we can talk about here. But it's kind of interesting to imagine the movies that Lazenby would have,
because he was really like tasty in a fist fight, wasn't he? Because he was like Bruce Lee was a mate, and he was going to be in Game of Death and all this. It's fascinating stuff, yeah. But I would have loved to. I think the fight scenes would have been incredible if he stayed on.
Well, what's your relationship with the movie we're talking about today, Ben? GoldenEye.
So obviously we've had a License to Kill was the last one, and then there was a big 6-year gap, wasn't there? So I was really, chomping at the bit. And then the trailer came out, and it just looked incredibly cool, didn't it? I thought I've rewatched the trailer quite a few times. It's just such a cool trailer. There's so many cool moments, like when he's hiding behind putting that bomb together, and a bullet ricochet comes. He just looks annoyed, doesn't he? He's like, get out of it. Yeah, it's brilliant. There's so many. I saw it at the Flicks, and I loved it. It's Brosnan's best, I think, in my humble opinion. I don't know if that's controversial, actually. I think it's generally regarded as
his best
one.
I think it's pretty widely accepted opinion, yeah. Did you see it when it came out, Liam, at the theater?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, this was like a big deal in the Billingham household. So, like, a new Bond. Again, my dad was like a completist, strong opinions. He probably, sorry to be controversial on the chain, he's probably the person responsible for my not liking most of the Roger Moore movies. Like, I think he kind of... we were such a Connery house. So I'm sure I saw this in the theater. I definitely watched it on VHS 400 times. I definitely had a VHS copy. And I actually rewatched it not so long ago. I think 6 years ago, while when my daughter was really little, I put her down for a nap, and I just was like, I'm going to put on GoldenEye. And I was like, wow, this movie rips. And then rewatching it again for this, I was like, yep, this movie still rips. It's just a well-made movie with a lot to recommend it. I mean, kind of amazing that it's Brosnan's first one.
Yeah, it's really an accomplished film. And I wanted to ask you guys as well a little bit, because I don't have quite the same. I wasn't in a Bond loving household particularly. I sort of grew up. Roger Moore, I think, was everybody's sort of de facto uncle in the UK, because you just spent so much time. The movies were on every weekend. A Roger Moore film, I felt like, was on every weekend. So inevitably, Roger Moore would be your sort of babysitter for 3 hours. Well, with all the adverts and everything, when these movies are usually 2.5 hours long. So Roger Moore would look after you for your afternoon. So I think a lot of people of my generation would have that kind of relationship with those movies. It was just like a bit of a comfort blanket, and it was just very British and sort of ubiquitous. But I wanted to ask you guys, because I saw this movie on video with my parents, and we actually really liked it. But as I said, they just weren't like, my dad wasn't particularly bothered about Bond. My mum had huge problems with the sexual politics of it and the all of that sort of stuff. So it was never like, no one was like forcing me to watch Bond. But we did watch this as a family and really enjoyed it. And I remember that, watching it on video. But I wanted to ask you guys if you remember the sort of significance of this as like a pop cultural event, because you also had the Tina Turner song.
Oh, yeah.
And then the video game, which is still like, has had this incredible sustained life. Do you guys remember much about that? Like the pop cultural asteroid that this film was when it came out?
Yeah, I mean, I think because it was such a long wait, people were just absolutely loving anything Bond, and he, it was brilliant. And the Tina Turner song is such an earworm, isn't it? I just keep hearing the dum 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 dum.
Every kind of creeps up on you.
Yeah. But
probably fair to remind that it was written by Bono in The Edge, which is something that a lot of people don't realize, is that the song was written by Bono in The Edge.
It's funny you bring that up, because I was also thinking the other half of you two, Larry Mullen and Adam Clayton, wrote the Mission
guys
Impossible.
Nobody knows the names of.
They wrote the Mission Impossible theme version for the 1996 movie, which is amazing. And it made me think, like, why didn't they do that more? Because they did it with Limp Bizkit with the second one, and then I felt like there should have been a current artist doing some riff on Mission Impossible for every one of those movies. But we can save that for that conversation.
For the Mission
we'll save
Impossible,
it for that conversation.
Run. Yeah.
So let's get into some quick fast facts about this bad boy. GoldenEye was released in the US on November 17th, 1995, directed by the great Martin Campbell. It, of course, stars in his first Bond film, Pierce Brosnan, Sean Bean, Izabella Scorupco, and Famke Janssen. Screenplay was by Jeffrey Kane and Bruce Fierstein, from a story by Michael France, of course based on the character created by Ian Fleming, on an estimated budget of $60 million. Do you have a guess as to how much this film grossed on a $60 million budget in 1995?
I don't know, like $356 million.
That's a pretty good guess. Yeah.
Thanks. Yeah. I have the outline.
Yes, indeed. So it's monster hit. Like crazy numbers. Massive international hit. So yeah, and you guys contributed to that box office, so you're part of Bond history.
You're welcome.
Can I add a fact to the top line fact check, which is this film also stars the great Godfrey John, who we have to talk about later in this episode.
This is in your Fassbinder
This
tangent?
is my Fassbinder,
Okay.
my important Fassbinder
Okay, we'll
tangent
get
that
to
I
it.
hope will come up at some
We'll get
point.
to it.
Very important stuff for me.
Well, of course, this is a show about Die Hard and the influence of Die Hard on the action genre. And again, people might be thinking, well, come on, guys. Are you just putting GoldenEye in here because, it's going to boost your numbers because it's a popular film and it grossed $356.4 million at the box office? And the answer is yes. However, there actually is a lot of what we like to call
Die Hard DNA
in this film. So here are the things that I spotted, and then feel free to add if you think I missed anything. Of course, we've got European villains. We've got the main bad guy being played by a distinguished British thespian. Did you notice the scene where the bad guys are firing machine guns into the vents, a la Carl, in the pursuit of, I think...
Famke Hansen does it, right? She's the big, and she's like breathing heavily. God, it's so weird. It's great.
Yeah, we'll get there.
So great.
We'll get there. I'll just dab my brow. Quirky, bespectacled computer hacker who provides comic relief. We've got bad guys demanding computer codes while holding people at gunpoint. Did you notice the riff on the Die Hard 2 ejector seat moment?
Yes,
that was that.
Even kind of the same shot, right? To some extent, when that scene where they have to escape from. I get they're trapped in is it a helicopter that they're stuck in, and
they're in the
and
Tiger.
They fire their own missiles at it, right? That's almost
Yeah.
the same shot. We saw it again in Terminal
That
Velocity
scene
as well.
rules.
Great scene.
That scene
I mean, one of the
rules,
classic,
man.
like, Bond, instead of just shooting them in the head, let's design, like, screwball scramble to have them off in some really elaborate way.
It's like the laser beam going through the table in Goldfinger, right? That's just
classic stuff.
It's iconic.
It's what we come to expect. You've also got a bit of like Bond as detective, like that scene, when he notices the watch is frozen by the EMP blast. He's kind of a bit of those kind of details that are a little McClane-esque. Also got an armored urban assault vehicle rolling through a civilian area, and one of the film's many memorable set pieces. But then it got a little bit more specific towards the end, and I was quite pleasantly surprised, because often I'll put, when I take these films to the lab and LA has its power outages, and I'm sorry about that.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's like it can be tenuous, but as the film went on, it got more and more specific, down to the point where the villain, who is using politics to mask a massive theft, right? The hero says to him, "You're nothing more than a common thief." The exact same.
Which is what Holly McClane says to Hans Gruber.
And then there's also lines like "Welcome to the party," and then there's a bit where he says, "Do you know how to use one of these?" when Bond hands over the gun. But the other sort of overarching thing that I think is worth discussing, beyond all the sort of Die Hard DNA that's actually in the film, is the sort of the meta-textual aspect of this, which is the Bronson-John McTiernan relationship. Right, which started with Nomads in 1986, which was McTiernan's feature debut, in which Brosnan stars as he's playing a French character. I think he's an anthropologist. It's been, I think it was a year or so since I last saw it, but as I recall, he's an anthropologist in LA, and he's investigating this weird gang, and it's like quasi supernatural. I really like this movie. This is the movie that got McTiernan Predator, because he was so adroit with suspense.
Wow.
Schwarzenegger saw it and thought they took a chance on him, and he proved to be an incredible choice. And then, so in some ways, Brosnan's movie career is actually quite tied to John McTiernan, because they would go on to collaborate again with the Thomas Crown Affair in 1999, after that Bond movie star persona had been established as the sort of suave, lovable rogue leading man that Brosnan really, he'd been a guy that had been around for a while, right? Remington Steele. He's even in Long Good Friday in one of his early parts. But and just in terms of he plays one of the IRA guys. Of course, he's actually Irish. Yeah, he's actually Irish in real life. Which is interesting, again, going back to the Lazenby of it all, who was Australian, and then you have Connery, who is Scottish. So it's interesting how these international actors have actually played the part that's so associated as for England, James, which we'll get to. But let's dig in a little bit more on our section about the hero right after this break. We're back with our next section of the show, Anatomy of an Action Movie, where we explore the tenets.
We live in a twilight world.
And there are no friends at dusk. Of
Ben, Tenet movie. Head, you on board? It's okay if you're not.
I have seen it. Not my favourite Nolan film, I'm afraid.
Okay. See you guys later.
We haven't met many Tenet heads, to be fair, have we? Like almost we get all excited, then we kick it over to our esteemed guests, and they're like, "Nah, not for me." almost without fail.
We got to find some more Tenet fans.
Where are you
when
guys?
we do a Tenet episode, yeah, come on.
Fair enough.
At Liam G. Billingham, tell me if you're a Tenet fan. Let's go. So I ordered my hot sauce an hour ago. Okay, go, Phil.
The first tenet of this movie of GoldenEye is, of course, is the premise. The first tenet of an action movie's anatomy is the premise, and the premise of this film is as follows. So, after the dissolution of the Soviet Union, MI6 agent James Bond uncovers a sinister plot led by rogue Russian operatives to use a Soviet-era orbital space weapon codenamed GoldenEye to launch an attack on London. In the process, Bond teams up with Natalya Simonova, a Russian satellite expert, in a globe-trotting race against time to prevent the strike. And then the ticking clock really is essentially, can Bond and Natalya stop the plot and take out the bad guys before the orbital weapon is launched on England's capital city?
You know, Phil, you could play Tanner. You really could play Tanner, the guy who gives him the briefing and about 25 minutes into the movie. Like, you just sounded like Tanner giving 007 a briefing.
Who's that actor?
Just saying.
Michael Kitchen.
Oh, Michael Kitchen. Yeah,
he's great. Is he one of those guys, you guys will know better than me, of course, that's like a member of the RSC or like does a ton of theater and like, you know, has like, is in a Bond movie for 25 minutes? Like, is that the kind of actor he is?
Yeah, and he had his own series as well. He was in Foyle's War, but he's so
That's
good
what
in
I was
this.
about to say. Foyle's War, yeah.
Evil Queen of Numbers. Yeah, he's very good in this.
My father-in-law was obsessed with Foyle's War. Would watch it over and over again. I don't think I ever placed it. That's so funny. Yeah, he's great in his little scene in this. He's so good.
Well, the other thing that's interesting about this, from the perspective of the concept, is this is the first completely original. This is the first completely original James Bond movie without any reference to any Ian Fleming novel or short story whatsoever. It's also, I thought, it was kind of wild that this is the second film in a row that involves the use of an orbital weapon after Under Siege 2.
Totally, it's really strange.
Really, really weird. So there was obviously something in the ether there. What do you think about this? I'm curious to get your thoughts on this, Liam, because you know it's a pretty good premise, but it addresses this idea. I think this is really important, of Bond as like a dinosaur and like a relic of the Cold War. And they have to sort of update the character as well, not only for that and the fact that politics have shifted and the wall has come down, and update the character for this new politically correct era in terms of the sexual politics and how he behaves and how mores have changed. It actually reminded me a little bit of, there was some sort of self-reflexive meta stuff that kind of reminded me of Top Gun Maverick, in the way that it was like this hero that's like, maybe he's obsolete, maybe the world has changed a little bit, but not today. Thank you very much. That kind of thing.
Yeah. It's so interesting. And like, you know, I can't speak to the British, I can, you know, as a non-Brit, I think there's an important, probably cultural understanding of what Bond represents that's different from an American. But this movie, you know, if the later Craig movies, I think the best James Bond movie is Skyfall, because it outright asks the question, like, who is James Bond and why does he matter? And I think that is very fascinating and cool. This movie plays with it, not to the same extent, but it's definitely there. Judi Dench, you know, the first female M, if I remember correctly, calling him a sexist, misogynist dinosaur, little things like that. There's the moment when they're on the Tiger helicopter and he says, "I'm a little tied up." And in the middle, he sort of stops the joke and goes, "Never mind." Like, it feels like it's interrogating the idea of this character and saying, like, what does James Bond mean after the wall falls? And it even plays with that with Russia. You know, Famke Hansen has a line where she says, "Russia is very different now, a land of opportunity." So it's like playing with our sort of understanding of what does Bond even mean in this period of time. And like, Russia is no longer this ideological state, but like a Cold War capitalistic, place where a Russian general who's considered to be obedient steals a weapon so he can get a ton of money. Like, all of the politics are actually just like, we don't have ideologies anymore. We want to make money, which is,
Very
we're going to see a
Die
lot more.
Very Die Hard again,
Yeah,
right?
we're going to see more of this sort of like, there's so many movies that we're going to be talking about where people say, I miss the Cold War. Because you understand who the enemy is. I just revisited The Peacemaker for another conversation we're going to have. And that's the whole idea of that movie, not to get on a tangent, is driven by like the idea that the hero can understand ideology, but he can't, or greed, but he can't understand ideology. Like, that's a big part of what that movie's about. And so it's just so interesting now as an adult to watch this and think about how Bond represents something different. Another great moment, John Doe Baker, James Bond walks up to him and says like some kind of code, that tells him he's a spy. And Joe Don Baker's like, oh yeah, why don't you shut the fuck up or whatever he says. And it's
Crying out loud,
that is also kind of a
stiff-ass
commentary.
prick.
Like, no one has time for your bullshit spycraft in 1994 or whatever year this happens to be. It's just a very self-aware, self-reflexive take on the mythos, but not quite at the Craig. Craig, I think, over literalizes it, but this really plays with it. That's not that's not meant as a dig at the Craig movies. I like those Craig movies quite a bit, but to me, this is a really interesting as the first post-Cold War James Bond movie, and it reminds me a little bit of The Hunt for October and how it deals with like post-Soviet identity.
Yeah.
And
What do you
these
think, Ben?
questions.
Like about this film as a student of the franchise, as a fan of it? How does this one fit into the wider picture? Do you like this as a premise? What are your kind of general thoughts on it on a concept and story level?
Yeah, well, because obviously the Bond films are kind of very affected by when they're made, aren't they? You got Star Wars comes out, so let's put Bond into space, and there was a lot of the sexual politics were changing, so let's address that. But having said all that, they still need someone to go out there and do the job, don't they? So that's why I think Bond will never really be obsolete. There'll always be room for Bond, but
Yeah.
But yeah, I thought it was, and also because it had been 6 years since the previous one, I guess they just wanted to introduce him and make sure it was different from the last one as well, didn't they?
Of course, and it's interesting as well that it actually has this weird thing that almost, and I tried to unpack this with another friend of mine who was also like really understood the canonical aspect of it, that it starts in the 80s. It has a prologue in the 80s, in the middle of the Cold War, with 007 and 006 involved on a mission. But that precedes the Dalton iterations in 1987 and 1989. So what does that mean for the canon of it all? Does that mean that there's actually, because it continued up until a certain point, they were actually consistent. It wasn't that it was a code name. It was that with different actors playing the same character and you had the same M's and so. But it all started to get a little bit complicated. But do you guys have any thoughts on the sort of multiverse aspect of what that does to the franchise?
I mean, I think it was just Bond on another mission. I think it was whoever Bond it is, could have been, Sean Connery. It's just another mission. Even though the continuity is crazy if you think about it.
It really is.
Yeah, but that's sort of what's really beautiful about this franchise. And we're not talking about the Craigs right now, but the attempt to build a one story over the course of the Craigs is really interesting and I think, compromised in some ways in those movies. But what I love about, Phil, it never occurred to me, and I've seen License to Kill, The Living Daylights, and GoldenEye 10 times. It's never occurred to me that technically the beginning of GoldenEye takes place before The Living Daylights and License to Kill, because it doesn't matter, right? Even though they're all of the same ilk, we don't spend that much time concerning ourselves with the continuity among them. One thing I think about a lot is the moment in License to Kill where Felix Leiter tells his soon-to-be murdered wife he was married once, and it didn't. And that has a lot of pathos because they do that so rarely in the franchise that it works really well, as opposed to trying to overly literalizing this happened and then this happened and then this happened. The continuity being a nightmare is something that we as viewers have all accepted for so long that it's honestly refreshing to go back and look at these and say, like, we're not too worried
Well,
about
they kind
it.
of just reset themselves, right, every time. And
Yeah.
now we're looking back at it in an era of extended cinematic universes and all of that stuff. But you also, in one realm of like Marvel, but then you have DC stuff, which is almost random, more like the comic book world, where there's a new interpretation of Batman this week that's in a different universe essentially than another interpretation of Batman and all of that type of stuff. So we're looking back at it, and this sort of preceded all of that. Although Die Hard was an ECU, as we learned in our Ricochet
Have you
episode.
guys read the books, the Ian Fleming books, much of them? Do they follow a clearer continuity, Ben?
I've not. I've read On a Majesty's Secret Service. I've got Casino Royale to read as well, but I've only read like a couple. But
okay,
does because Pierce's Bond doesn't make reference to Tracy, does he? His dead wife, or does he?
I don't think so. I don't think it comes up. At least, the ones that I revisit the most often are really only GoldenEye and Tomorrow Never Dies. I've seen every Pierce Brosnan Bond, but from my point of view, there's real diminishing returns there. I don't ever recall a single reference to Tracy. I only recall it in License to Kill, and I feel like the Craig does away with it because it's an origin.
Yeah,
it's an origin
and
story.
Roger Moore does it in For Your Eyes Only. It's the pre-title sequence. He puts
flowers on. I love that movie. Yeah, that's a good one. So every so often they kind of like visit it, right? But they don't like make it a huge part of the story.
Well, speaking to the lineage of Bond, and I wanted to say as well, like you mentioned how much you love Lazenby, and Liam, you're a big Connery guy. You're both big Connery guys, and I'm a big Dalton guy. Dalton, and there's not too many of us that are ready to really go to bat for Dalton, but there are some, and those two are my favorites. I'm not saying they're the best.
Which two? Dalton,
Living Daylights and License to Kill are my two favorite Bond films. I do agree with you. I think the best Bond film is Skyfall. I think I love the sort of best of British aspect of that film. It's all British brands. There's Union Jacks everywhere. There's a real sense of class to that film. And like you said, there's a muscularity to it. There's a prestige aspect to it. It's just
it's a real masterpiece,
awesome.
I think. I think it's incredible.
It's very emotional.
One of those movies, if it's on, I'm watching it.
It's great.
Yeah. If I'm on a plane, I'm putting that on. If it's on the flight,
But my point is, I'm coming into this film with like a real love of Dalton, and now it's a new actor. And so let's move into our hero section about Pierce Brosnan as James Bond, because I think he's amazing. I have to say, I love Pierce Brosnan in general as a person and as an actor. And it's almost like it was so tailor-made for him. He is the perfect synchronicity between character and actor at the right age. And of course, he was cast previously before Dalton and couldn't get out of his Remington Steele contract, and I believe actually got up to the point where they were shooting the famous like gun barrel credit sequence thing, and then the contractual thing, the anvil came down and the plug was pulled, so he had to wait. But in a weird way, I actually think it worked out better, because when we got those two Dalton films, which are very different and I think are great, and he's great and offers something different. And then you get him as a little bit older, a little bit more sort of filled himself out a little bit, and more of a man than a younger guy, because he was quite a very slim, slight guy, Pierce Brosnan, but he looks like he looks tough in this. What are your thoughts on what Pierce Brosnan does in this film that's different, maybe? What does he offer that's different from the previous like iconic actors that have played this iconic role?
I think he's kind of part way between Connery and Roger Moore. I think this one's a bit more Connery, but he's still doing the Roger Moore quips. I don't think he's as tough as Connery. Connery was, he's not as stoic. Because he's a bit smiley, and when he's in pain, he's quite vocal, isn't he? When he's trying to pry the legs apart.
Yeah.
And I think he's the most vocal, but apart from when Daniel Craig gets his nuts whacked. But he's quite vocal, isn't he? And he's the only. Is he the only Bond that openly laughs and stuff? I don't know if that, because at the end he's like picks her up and laughs.
Yeah, he's so warm.
Yeah.
that moment, I wanted to drive. Ben, it's so interesting you brought that up because, like, that moment pulls me out of the movie because he's so. Maybe it's the Irish thing. I don't know, like to cast a stereotype, but he's just so like warm and like the smile breaks the character a little bit. But I don't know if that's a bad thing because like you want James Bond to be like, sometimes you're like, I want you to be a little nicer than you're like, Connery is a legendary prick, right? In a great way. He's a great, like, you know, he throws a toaster in the bathtub and says shocking. Or whatever. Like he's a murderer, right? And Roger Moore is like, you know, kind of suave and sort of cheesy, sort of intentionally. And Dalton is just like a bull, right? Like, so it's like Brosnan brings this like warmth to the character. Like even the moment when he pulls the gun on Xenia and he goes, no, no, no. Like there's this other thing going on with him that's like really strange. But like, he's just so warm and kind of like the nicest James Bond.
He's quite nimble with comedy though as well, because he just done Mrs. Doubtfire, which is basically a straight up farce, you know. Yeah. And that kind of, I think, proved some of his bona fides to some extent, you know, similar, like suave character. He's like, the character's going to steal her away, but you still quite like that character, you know, because he just does resonate likability. And even though he's like ridiculously handsome and debonair, there's something about him that is, as you say, it is warm. You know, I saw a clip recently of him. I don't know if you guys saw this, where him as a person, and it was on like one of the junkets, and the journalist was interviewing him, and the journalist was from the same small town in Ireland that he's originally from. And it was such a, and he you could see how sort of touched he was by it, and his accent started to come out a little bit more as they sort of talked about it, and it was such a, he's like so charming, but not in a way where you feel like it's charming in a way that's like calculated. He just seems to radiate that somehow.
Well, there's also this little bit of a renaissance going on with him. Like he's in that Eurovision movie where he plays Will Ferrell's dad. And like,
again,
which
comedy.
is, I think, a very fun movie,
fun.
Actually. And like kind of having this moment where like he did it. Like Pierce Brosnan's a success story. Like he's played James Bond. He's done all these things. Like he's sort of become like, he's in the Mamma Mia movies, I just remembered. Like, he's kind of like a zaddy. Like, he's a hot, older dude, right? That, like, played James Bond. And, like, you know, I think he's having this sort of, like, lap. He's doing a lap right now.
He was great in Black Adam and was widely considered, like, the best part of that film.
Is he in Black Adam?
He's great in it. And, again, it has that mix of action and, like, kind of a little bit of comedy.
Tongue-in-cheek.
He's playful, you know. But I think if you were to look at, like, if there was a checklist for Bond, which to some extent there must be, whether it's like written down in black and white, but when the broccolis
I'm shocked you haven't written this down yet.
Well, let's crack it. Like, let's crack it together. Because the things that I would say, like, there are certain boxes that need to be ticked. And this is what they're going to be going through with their search now as we think about who the next Bond might be. But there's certain things that have to work for this character. First of all, aesthetically, you have to be handsome, you have to be attractive, because there is an element to him as he's always, you know, he has to be a seductive character to some extent. He has to be charming. He has to look, and this is really important, he has to look like he can handle a gun and beat somebody up. And Brosnan really, in the moments when he is handling a gun or is physical, really looks physical. Like the scene that you talked about with Joe Don Baker, where he says, no, I'm not going to do your stupid code. And he's like, oh, really? Okay. And then he like grabs him and pulls the gun on him in a really like skillful way. He has to look like he's been trained by SAS, right? Like he has to just look the part in those moments when required. There has to be that little bit of wit, and they all have different iterations of it. Craig is very, you know, gosh, he's much more serious actor, has so much more gravitas.
Well, yeah, I think he's the best actor to ever play the part in some ways, you know, which is not a diss to the other guys because they had different assignments. But if you want to like explore the tragedy and pathos of James Bond, Daniel Craig is great at that. I think Brosnan also has a little bit of Dalton in him, like that intensity and that like I'll murder a dude, the kind of anger that he does really, really well. Like he really is quite well rounded for the part. And I think, you know, I would rank him among my top 3 James Bonds for sure, even if sometimes I think that warmth is almost a little like surprising.
You have any final thoughts on Brosnan? Where would you put him, Ben?
Okay, only I don't know about it's difficult. He's brilliant in this. Was this film written for Dalton?
Well, funnily enough,
was there a bit of overlap? Because it's
no.
Isn't it the opposite? Wasn't License to Kill written for Brosnan originally?
It goes back and forth again, speaking to the multiverse, the multiplicity of all of this. So Brosnan was supposed to take over from Moore, as we said, couldn't get out of the Remington Steele contract, had been offered the part, agreed to it, began the process, and then the contract shut that down. So then they go with Dalton. Dalton is supposed to do a third film, which I believe is called Property of a Lady, that he was contracted to do.
And they made the posters and went out for international
that's right,
sales.
They're up at Cannes, I think, and you can see that if you a diligent Google search, you can find some of that stuff. But what actually happened is quite interesting, because Dalton reached a point where there was such a long wait. There was also a huge additional contractual problem with MGM and the rights, and I think the Fleming estate and the Broccolis and all of this sort of stuff. And it took a long time to untangle it, by which point Dalton just felt like, it felt like he was a bit too old for it, and that the moment had passed, and that his head and heart maybe weren't in it anymore. And there was a feeling, so they were like, well, but you're contracted to do it, right? So they basically reached an agreement where it was kind of like, well, we don't want to just have you come back after a 6-year wait for one film. The better thing to do is just reboot it completely with a new actor. So they kind of worked it out. But what I did read recently was that Brosnan was supposed to do Casino Royale, and actually got told, like, hey, it's not going to work out, and was quite hurt by it. So yeah, it's kind of like one of the, it's an interesting cycle that it's been with these guys, and over the years, and it's gone back and forth. But I think the general feeling is, I think from Bond fans, is like Brosnan was like one of the best Bonds with a series of the weaker films. You know, you know, he was so good. But I in this one, to me, it's like just a bullseye.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. That's why I thought it might be, it feels tonally so different from the rest. That's why I wondered if it was originally a bit for Dalton, because it's quite tough. And I was kind of imagining Dalton in this as well, seeing if I could do that. And I don't know if he's, Brosnan's better with the fisticuffs, I think. I think he's much more physical, I think. The rolling around up when they're in the antenna kind of hut.
Well, speaking of physical, let's move on to our next section, which is about the villains of this motion picture, starting with another incredible British actor, Sean Bean as Alec Trevelyan. What are your guys' thoughts on that intersection of of actor and character? I think it's pretty great.
Yeah, amazing. He's kind of Bond's match, isn't he, physically and mentally? And was he offered Bond?
That's
Sean
interesting.
Bean? I think he might have been.
That would be an interesting. I've never heard that, but again, what was that other show? What was the show that he did in? Speaking of like things like Foyle's War, Sharp. Right, it was a British. You know, he was sort of suave, sexy hero, but the thing is, Sean Bean reads so working class, right? Like he just reads gritty, blue-collar, working class Yorkshire. You know, famously, Sheffield United supporter, has a tattoo, 100% blade. You know, he's of that world. So to me, like, that's not so much the classical interpretation of James Bond, that it's slightly posher, slightly more, you know, upper middle class, like well heeled. Even if that's not the reality of the character, that's how he reads, because he has to move in fancy circles. He has to be in a tuxedo with socialites and billionaires in, you know, Chinese casinos, right? Sean Bean being like, all right, Chuck, how you doing? You know, it's a little incongruous. So he's perfect for this.
Whenever I think about him in this movie, I can't help but think about him in Ronin, where he plays this pathetic, you know, kind of like,
oh, fuck off.
Yeah. Like, and like, he's so insecure and like, do you ever kill anybody? I can't do the accent, but like, he doesn't, his rage is more powerful than how suave he is, which is great in this movie. And when he's revealed among, God, talk about not subtle, but amazing, revealed among the ruins of the Soviet Empire. And it's like, he just absolutely owns that moment of the movie. I think he's great in this movie. Like, totally, brilliant. You know, and it's a real nice contrast to Ronin, like just the kind of character.
And I thought it was such an original take on a Bond villain, right? Because usually, and it does sort of tick some of the boxes. There has to be some kind of facial disfigurement and things like that. But usually the Bond villains are a little bit more larger than life, and they're usually international, right? They're usually foreign, as in they're not British or they're not American, or they're not American, right? They're usually European or some, something that
but this
Brits
also
would think
connects
of as a bit
to
more
history.
exotic.
I love the decision to make him Lienz Cossack, right? Because it just fits in with history and this kind of idea that he's like othered despite being
Brilliant
British,
backstory,
right?
isn't it?
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's really clever.
The way that it ties in with the history, and I think it's one of the best. I would go so far as to say is this is like a top 5, if not top 3 Bond villain.
Well,
Yep.
and it also matches with Silva in Skyfall, in that he has this sort of like I'm angry at the Empire thing, which is what helps with the commentary. Like when sort of like the character has to deal with the consequences or of the British, this British Secret Service state's decision making and like British history, like the movies get better in my opinion if they really want to be about something significant, because it's kind of like this is your fault, you set those charges to go off early, right? Like there's pathos to it that is not I'm thinking of like Moonraker,
complex.
which Ben
Yeah.
mentioned earlier. You're kind of like like it's appropriate for this to have with what's going on in action filmmaking, for this to have levels and depth that maybe they wouldn't have had before. And Tomorrow Never Dies does something really interesting with the villain too. So like there's really interesting villains in the Brosnan era.
So our second villain, though, is a pretty incredible one, and I would also put as one of the top villain. I mean, she's not the primary antagonist, but in terms of vivid Bond villainy, it doesn't get more spectacular and impactful than Famke Janssen as Xenia Onatop. A sadistic lust murderer, according
Is it
to the
hot in here?
Wikipedia.
I can't. I'm heavy.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, I mean, look, I'm going to be a little boy for a second. This did things to me as a kid. But, watching it now, I think she's amazing. She's so good. She kind of like brings the Jaws kind of character into the modern era in this really, really fascinating way. And she's brutal. And her scenes with Brosnan are great. I'm a huge fan of, as a 14-year-old, I was a huge fan. As a 40-year-old, I'm like, this is a good character. And she's amazing. And what isn't her film debut?
I think it is her major film debut.
Yeah,
That's she's incredible.
Yeah.
Go ahead,
When I watched it through, I noticed quite a few different things. One of them was like in the sauna, she comes at him right up to his nose and he goes, that's far enough. And I thought that was quite funny because you literally couldn't get any further. But it's an absolute star-making turn, isn't it? She's so good in it. And yeah, she's definitely, obviously, one to watch then. And she's done really well.
I mean, I want to talk about her for a second because I think, beyond the obvious, like, take my shoe off and whack it on my head reaction to this character, she's an extraordinary actor. And what I really admire about her is that she didn't just sort of be like, okay, you're this incredibly sexy bombshell, like visually striking and clearly very charismatic. But then she did a movie called City of Industry, which was like a post-Tarantino gritty crime film with Harvey Keitel, Tim Hutton, and Stephen Dorff, in which she plays the sort of browbeaten wife of a kind of loser criminal, like they're like jewel thieves, and she was very clever about like, hey, I'm not going to just do these types of parts. I'm going to do. I mean, it was a funny. She's great in the movie, but she is married to someone that, let's just putting it kindly, doesn't look like Pierce Brosnan. So it's not the most believable relationship that someone that sort of beautiful is in this really, really like shitty situation in like the boonies of like LA County and living this terrible life and blah 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 blah. But I think she's believable. She's still believable because she's such a great actress.
She's also amazing in the X-Men movies as Jean Grey, which is one of the hardest characters in that franchise to be for a variety of reasons, and she's really, really good in it.
And she did Rounders and movies like that, and she's just had an amazing career.
She's in the Taken movies. She's a really interesting actress, and like
so much fun every time she's on screen. The John Favreau, Vince Vaughn movie.
Oh, the sort
where
of
she's
swinger
great in
sequel,
that.
essentially.
You
Yeah,
know, she's just great in everything. But I couldn't think of too many other actors that have played henchies, male or female, in Bond films that have had like a 30-plus year exceptional career like Famke Janssen has, which is just a testament to her talent.
Maybe Kim Basinger in Never Say Never Again. That might be your only sort
she
of
won
like
an Oscar.
parallel. Yeah, for an amazing performance.
Well, now Liam made the good point this morning as we were going over the, I'd say the outline. These things completely improvised. There's no outline. Where you mentioned that we hadn't brought up a category that has sort of fallen through the cracks recently, and that
She's
category
a lady.
is.
Whoa, she's a lady. Thank you.
Backed
I make
by
my money doing
unpopular
impressions.
demand.
Yeah.
It's the lady.
Look, I think it's fair to say that Izabella Scorupco is great in this movie. She fulfills the contractual obligations of making out with James Bond 2 minutes after a PTSD event when she should really hate his guts, which they've never properly addressed.
Turn.
Like, oh, cool, we almost just died. You want to do it by the train tracks? It's ridiculous, but. She's also smart. She's like she can hold her own. Like they do make an effort. Again, it's that tension. They want James Bond to be the James Bond he's always been. They also know that it's it's 1994, right? So it's like she has to be a Bond girl, but she has a little bit of. She calls him on his bullshit a few times, which I think is great. And also she's like able to use a gun and sneak around herself, and like she's not a total damsel in distress. And she slaps the shit out of Alan Cumming. So I wanted to give her a quick shout out because I think she's wonderful in the movie.
Yeah, and she spikes Boris, doesn't she, with this weird internet from the 90s thing. Just type in Spike and it ruins the whole...
Type in send Spike and it works.
But yeah, because she kind of she's a massive help at the end, isn't she? When they're trying to stop the evil plan.
It's interesting, yeah, that in this one, I'm trying to how much that this is the case in previous Bond iterations where the leading lady, I guess it kind of has, it did kind of happen in the two Bond ones. Basically, how much is it like almost a buddy movie, right? To some extent with a romantic element, right? The two of them kind of team up. That does happen in Living Daylights with the cellist character. Is it Miriam Darbo, I think is the name of the actress, who's great. And then the wonderful Pam Bouvier, played by Carrie Lowell in License
Carrie
License
Lowell
to
is
Kill.
a top 5 Bond girl. She's so great. So
it is kind of cool that she's not a damsel in distress, right? Is the point? She's an active participant in them trying to save the day. Didn't really do, but it is interesting. She's kind of the bigger part, but it's Famke Janssen is the one that went on to have this.
Well, she like walks away
career.
with the movie,
yeah.
Almost in the way that Anna de Armas does in No Time to Die, the last Bond film. She just has these 10 minutes, and you're like, holy crap! Why is she not in the whole movie? She's amazing.
Well, let's move on to our section about the action in this film, because it's a pretty great on an action movie level. I think it's pretty great. As we talked about, it begins with this opening sequence with the 006 thing that kind of reminded me, like, it feels like the ending of another awesome movie we didn't see, like Demolition Man begins in that way, where it's like the prologue is like the ending to another saga, which I think is really kind of cool. What were your favorite action moments or stunts or set pieces in this movie? I'm going to go to Ben first on this.
Please, Ben.
Well, obviously this is the first time we see the new Bond, so I love the introduction of Pierce in the. I know you just talked about the opening, but the opening to me is just so good. Like, you never quite see his face; you see his eyes when he's lasering through the roof, and then you see him upside down and he decks a Russian having a shit, and then he just slides into
to knock. Yeah, it's so good. It's
and
so
he goes
good.
in noiselessly, slides out. I think it was so cool the way he slides into the. You see him from the cubicle just slide in. I love that bit.
Yeah,
and then just even the way that they get shot's quite cool. That like the Russians are running towards them, they get shot and they get thrown back. But I think so. There's that one, but then the tank bit is just incredible, isn't it? The tank scene, and there's a scene where they're escaping. That whole bit I love, where they're escaping from the prison and she gets captured and he has to follow her in the tank. So yeah, those three bits are my favourite action scenes. Kind of cheating.
I don't have a favorite action scene. I think this is the best one of the best action Bond movies ever made. But I also think, Ben, you said something earlier that I think is very true, which is like, they're all products of their time, right? And I think it's fair to say that like, there's no way they could have pulled off the things that they do in this movie in an earlier time with the kind of innovations that have happened in filmmaking, right? Like it's just so like a bunch of other films have been made in the decade prior to this. Die Hard, Lethal Weapon 2. Like there's this big movement towards figuring out how to make these kind of movies work. And so like it's really a beneficiary of like, what happens in film prior to this to allow for like, they know how to drive a tank down the street now. They know how to like make it break out a wall. They know how to make this stuff look realistic. And like, Martin Campbell is a genius, of a director. And like, it's just very impressive because you could never get a movie like this one before it in the James Bond canon. There are other good James Bond movies with action, but like, they're in the golden age at this moment in terms of making these movies.
I just want to pick up on the point you made about Martin Campbell, because I also think he's a genius, and I don't think he's talked about. He's never really talked about as reductive term, but like an auteur, right? As opposed to I think he's generally perceived as more of a journeyman, right? Like if you want to be reductive and put them into one of those two camps,
that's
which
sort
is not
the career he had, sure, but yes,
but. I don't know if you guys have ever seen Edge of Darkness, the miniseries that he made in the mid-'80s with Bob Peck.
I've only seen the Mel Gibson remake.
Yeah, me too.
Which he also directed.
Yeah.
And the Mel Gibson remake is pretty good, but the original Edge of Darkness miniseries is the best miniseries I've ever seen.
Oh,
wow.
It's absolutely incredible. I'd put it up there with like Chernobyl and...
Do you have the Blu-ray?
If I did...
you wouldn't lend it to me. Ben, can we talk about this for a minute? Phil won't lend me Blu-rays. I live down the street from him and do a movie podcast with him, and I'm like, can I borrow your Blue Thunder Blu-ray? And he's like, nope, sorry. No, yeah. He's a real jerk. He's a real Scrooge about it.
I've got issues. Like, yeah, I'm a real Scrooge about that.
Like,
and the
evil
chronology.
Queen of Hearts won't lend me his Blu-rays.
The chronology of this show is the other thing that I'm a real bastard about, a la James Bond. But yeah, Martin Campbell is amazing. And of course, it's wild that he did the reboot of this effectively with the new Bond of Brosnan and then did the Casino Royale reboot as well. Just a really, really, I think, underrated and perhaps sort of culturally under-respected director.
He also made The Mask of Zorro, which is a fucking great movie. Like a great Zorro movie. Have you guys seen that? The Mask of Zorro with Antonio Banderas? It's amazing. It's so, so good. And that also, Catherine Zeta-Jones kind of blows up in that movie. So he clearly has a way with like giving great roles to up-and-coming actresses.
And The Foreigner, awesome. Did he do The Foreigner with, again, Pierce Brosnan? Was that one of his? Jackie Chan?
Oh, yeah, I think he did do that. He did do The Foreigner, which I haven't seen, but everybody swears by.
It's really good. I read it's quite a pulpy book that I read it ages ago, so I was quite looking forward to seeing it. It's great.
Vertical Limit he made. Phil, he directed No Escape.
Oh yes, of course. I took it to the lab. Unfortunately, it narrowly failed the genetic testing.
And you shut down the power for 3 days in Glendale. It was very unfortunate.
Well, it's a movie that we talked about a little bit on the Terminal Velocity episode with Rob Hackett. Shout out to Rob. It's kind of Die Hard in a penal colony, but I really like that movie. Really, really cool movie. He's made some pretty diverse stuff, you know. So the action in this movie is great. I totally agree. When that tank comes through the wall and the music kicks in, that's just like
rocks,
bliss,
dude.
Bond
that's the
bliss.
90s. That's the glory of the 90s, and
fantastic
5 seconds. Yeah,
and
amazing.
Tone as well, just like nailing tone.
Yeah,
right. Like the grandiosity of it, the sense of humor of it, the playfulness of it. Cold War imagery, just like it's just everything coalescing into one spectacular moment. So action in this movie is great, and then the big stuff in Cuba at the end with the
satellite fight is
that
great.
Stuff's really great
yeah,
too.
It's amazing.
Let's move on to the last section of the Anatomy of an Action movie, which is the humor in this movie.
I am invincible.
A little bit more.
Ooh.
There's some tough stuff. There's some to quote the James Spader movie. There's some tough turf. I just
think Alan Cumming, who's a wonderful, 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 wonderful actor, it's just a bizarre choice to cast him as Boris, right? Like it leans hard into a caricature. You need that character, but it never quite like clicks for me personally.
Ben, you're funny. Tell us about the humor in this film.
Well, we're not at best quip yet, are we?
No, we're coming to that.
Okay.
We're coming to that.
But
that's
I think it's pretty funny. I think I like the way he handles the humour in this film. In later films, I think he's a bit too on the nose, to be honest. Whereas this one, I think the directors maybe said, "Oh, can we go another take, but less cheesy or some." But I think Pierce is very good with the humour in this. It's quite funny. There's lots of good exchanges, aren't there, with like Valentine.
Which character is that?
Robbie Coltrane.
Oh yeah, Robbie Coltrane's incredible in this movie.
Lest we forget. Like,
have you any idea how long the winters last in this country? Tell him, Dimitri. Well, it depends. Silence.
That's good. Good, Robbie Coltrane. That was excellent, especially with that accent. That's good.
Stop it.
Another like legendary British actor, and of course, started his own TV series, Cracker, that was huge, and
he has this second life in the Harry Potter movies. Like he really is like beloved by people. What a great actor.
But the humor overall for me is like there are some like witty lines and some funny bits, but I did find myself like, look, I'm 42-year-old dad, so I'm like Cringe City. I'm the mayor of Cringe City, but even then, I was some of this stuff I was like, "Ooh, this is there's some groaners like for real."
The Q stuff was pretty grim, wasn't it?
Oh gosh, there's some stuff that's just like, oh.
Yeah, he deserves better. Like Desmond Llewellyn deserves better than what he gets in this movie. I think, unfortunately,
there's not too many laugh out loud. Like there's not much genuine wit. It's like that kind of eye rolling Roger Moore style.
Come on, the sandwich.
Yeah. Well, now one of the other things, in addition to being a stickler about lending my Blu-rays and the chronological format of this show, the other thing I'm a stickler about is formality of dress for this podcast. So I'm pleased to see that you've both got your tuxedos on. We're
going to play Baccarat. Ben and I are going to play Baccarat after this. Is it? Where does that take place? Monte Carlo? Is that where they? No, where are they?
Usually, yeah.
Yeah. We're going to do that. That's our plan.
So you can with your Union Jack parachutes, you can parachute down to the Dolby Theatre as we head to
the Die Hard Oscars.
The Die Hard Oscars, aka the Action Movie Awards. Are you trying to interrupt me? like what's happening?
Just trying to add a little zest, a little spice it up a little bit. Joie de vivre.
Little tension.
Okay. So
little tension. Kind of make you mad a little. No, of course not. No.
As if remote podcasting wasn't challenging enough.
We're doing great.
Our first award is the John McClane Yippee-Ki-Yay Award for Best Line. And I have 3 nominees for you guys, but feel free to add.
Okay.
My first is For England, James. I don't know why I did that in a really bizarre way.
Are you smoking cigarettes? I don't know what happened. Yeah.
For England, James. The total.
Remember how John McTiernan is 83 years old in this movie?
That sounded like Sid James.
Like no teeth as well. Why did you decide to do it with no teeth?
For England, James.
that Simpsons character.
That's the Carry On version. There is something about that line. Can we touch on that for a second? Being English, like it really, really like hits for me. Do you know? Am I way off on that, Ben? But like, is there something powerful about that idea?
Yeah, no, it does kind of I suppose remind them that their motivations are for the country, and it's like there's a lot at stake here. So yeah, no, it's a very good line, and it's
the last thing he says as well, isn't it? I think before he dies, in quotes, right? The Sean Bean character.
Yeah. Another similarity between Die Hard. They're both villains fall from a massive height.
Yes.
I forgot about that.
We'll come to that when we get to our final category. But yeah, I had that one. I also had I'm Invincible. And don't touch that. That's my lunch.
Wait, those are your 3? You don't have the best line in the whole movie. The Bill Billingham special, which is when the psychiatrist says, I like a Spirited Drive as much as the next girl. And then Famke Hansen looks at him. She goes, who's that? And he says, the next girl. My dad, 20 minutes of laughter. Love that line. The next girl is absolutely my pick for the winner.
I hate that sequence.
Really?
The music in that sequence.
Oh yeah, bow, bow, bow. It's like a bass just slapping as hard as it can.
Props.
But that is an amazing James Bond line. Like that, that is great.
I quite like, I'm going to throw in, use the bumper, that's what it's for. And they just start bumping all these people out of the way. But I think I'll go with, what were your ones again? Sorry?
For England, James, I'm Invincible, and don't touch that. That's my lunch.
I think I might go for I'm Invincible because of the the irony, because he's not.
Yeah, don't touch that. That's my lunch. Is rough stuff. Rough stuff. Also because they clearly grabbed like a crafty sandwich and threw it down very quickly.
Well, for me, it's for England, James. I love that. I
Yeah.
actually think it's actually a really, really brilliant line, especially in its emotional context. That it's like the last thing he says. That it is like reminds you, that they're supposed to be serving a kind of higher purpose. So that one did touch me in my. I'm so patriotic about being English. That's why I live in Los Angeles. Moving on. So it sounds really hypocritical whenever, England. Where do you live?
I'll have a green juice, please.
We'll cut this out. Next section.
Nope.
The Hans Gruber Exceptional Thief Award for stealing the film. And our nominees are, now this was actually pretty tough.
A lot of good stealers.
Incredible supporting cast. Sean Bean as Alec Trevelyan, Famke Janssen as Xenia Onatop, and we haven't really talked about her, Dame Judi Dench as M.
She steals Skyfall. I'm saving it for that.
I think I'm going with Famke Janssen, just because every time she's on screen, it's just like you can't take your eyes off her because she's so charismatic.
Yeah, she's wonderful. I think it's her as well.
I agree, but I do think that like watching the class and like the precision of Dame Judi Dench in those scenes and the way that she just like eviscerates him with her manner and her words, it's just like beautiful to watch.
Can I just point out something that I think is brilliant, which at one point she says, would you like a drink? And he says, yeah, your predecessor kept, and she says, I prefer bourbon. And then she says, ice. And he says, yes. And then she doesn't give him ice.
Oh, wow. I never noticed that.
Mm-hmm.
Love it. Love that eye for detail.
It's just kind of like a little like, fuck you. Like it's good. It's really, really good.
She is like so important to this film. Without that character, this is still like a kind of a sexist relic, which is what James Bond, kind of is. So to have him like challenged in that way by such a like weighty performer, I just love that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Now here we're coming to our next section is the Dick Thornburg Award for Dick of the Movie, and I have 3 nominees. Gottfried John,
woo,
giving you the chance to talk about it. Hold on, hold your horses, you'll get there. As General, I can't say it, Ourumov,
yeah, something like that.
Alan Cumming as Boris. And James Bond himself, particularly for his behavior towards Caroline during that high-speed racing scene that made me feel like if I was in that situation, and first of all, I'm terrified of like driving around those kind of places in Italy and stuff. And I'm like, that really freaks me out, even if we were going at like 5 miles per hour, let alone going at like whatever they're doing.
Yeah.
I was really like, wow, you really are a dick, huh? James Bond is a prick.
Yeah,
and has always been, right? Like he has always been.
It's what makes
prick.
him great. Yeah, it's part of what makes him an interesting guy.
I think I'm going to go with Ormorov because he's brilliant in this. Yeah, he's kind of and he gets dispatched relatively early, doesn't he? Like about halfway
that's
through.
right. Yeah,
he's. I like the way.
Great face, hasn't he? That actor, great face.
So Gottfried John is a really, really pivotal figure in the German new wave cinema in the 70s, particularly because he worked with, I don't know how much you guys know about Rainier Werner Fassbinder, but he was a German new wave director. He died at 37. Between 1967 and 1982, when he died at 37, he made over 40 feature films, 24 plays, 2 television series, and 4 video productions. He was one of the most prolific. He worked himself to death and did a lot of drugs. And just an amazing guy. Made a film. There's a film you should check out he made. It's a sci-fi film called World on a Wire, which is like truly, truly bizarre. But
the
like
OG
absolutely
13th Floor.
Yeah, yep, exactly.
Wow.
Totally worth
And
watching. And Gottfried John
Matrix
is
a little
in...
bit, right? Like
What?
Doesn't it have some Matrix connection?
It's totally influential and totally worth seeing. But, Gottfried John is in Berlin Alexanderplatz, which is probably considered by many to be his masterpiece. And he sort of straddled TV and film in this really exciting way. And actually, you probably can't see, but Gottfried John is on the cover of it, the blue of 8 Hours Don't Make a Day, which is a series he made about workers' rights for German television in the 80s. Just an extraordinary filmmaker, but Gottfried John is like the warm, welcoming face of some of these movies and just like a really warm, great actor. He also is in the Asterix and Obelix, one of those films, so like kind of the kind of like European stalwart of an actor that you get in these kinds of movies. Who's the villain in Never Say Never Again. He's a similar kind of
Klaus Marie Barber or Barber.
Yeah, exactly.
He's
Yeah,
brilliant,
these kind of guys who like you get a little bit exposed to, and then when you see them when you're 14 in a James Bond movie, and then you get older and you're like, holy crap, I'm gonna watch everything this guy did. So Gottfried John, this movie may be kind of a gateway drug for me to see some of those films because I've always loved Ourumov.
Very cool.
In this movie.
Well, we'll give the award. We'll give the award to him. I'm sure it's one of the many prestigious awards that he's received in his time in the German New Wave, and now he can add to his mantelpiece the Dick Thornburg Dick of the Movie Award.
Absolutely.
Final category is the best death. A few good ones. I've got Xenia Onatopp being crushed.
Wait, who? I'm sorry.
I'm sorry.
Been a special request. Who presents the best death award?
I'm just getting in my earpiece now is that he may be backstage. We weren't sure, but it looks like he's just made it. Is Marco here?
No more table! Next time you have a chance to kill someone, don't hesitate. Well, I'm going to check the level on that one.
Amazing.
Woo! Ben,
Marco
I'm here for you anytime.
back.
Anytime.
Can I do my Die Hard?
My audience.
Can I do my Die Hard quote now?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, here we go.
Yeah.
What idiot put you in charge? You did when you murdered my boss.
Yeah!
Woo!
That was great. Oh my
Love
God.
that. Love
what
that.
we don't talk enough about on the show is Die Hard. That's a good movie. I like it. I'm a big fan.
Well, that was great, guys. I really enjoyed that. I'm sorry I don't have one myself.
Come on.
I'll need to work
come
on it.
Come on.
Come on.
No,
he
we're
did
conscious of
Sean
time.
Bean. He did Sean Bean.
Come
I did Sean
on.
Bean, that's right.
Yeah, you
I
did.
Sean.
Fine.
I did Sean Bean.
The quarterback is toast.
It has to be natural. You can't put me on the spot. I'm getting flustered. Right. The best death. I've got Xenia Onatopp being crushed against a tree while attached to a helicopter cable. Alec Trevelyan falling from a great height, as Ben pointed out.
That's a great shout. Yeah.
Gruber-esque death. Being killed by he gets killed by falling debris. But echoes of Lithgow in Cliffhanger and Sean Bean's death in Patriot Games. And then Boris being frozen by liquid nitrogen. Got 3 for you.
I think I'm going to go with Sean.
Thoughts?
Because it's like a double death, isn't it? I think, was it a reshoot,
Yes.
that thing falling on him? Because that would have
Just
killed
to make
him,
sure
wouldn't
he's
it?
really dead. Like,
Yeah,
he's dead, but
that
he's
fall-
really dead now.
It is shocking to me they show him hit the ground in a PG-13 movie.
Yeah.
Yeah, like it is intense. I'm with Ben on this, but
a
I
good
also think Xenia's death is
Yeah.
great. God,
Well,
that would be
yeah.
painful. Anyway.
But, just before, the video game, did you play the video game? Because me and Phil...
Oh my God, obsessively.
Because me and Phil tried to play Halo in a day. I know it's not really connected, but we tried
Like
to
the
play...
whole game?
Yeah, and we lasted a few hours and then we just stopped because it was so disorientating and horrible, wasn't it?
I remember this really well.
It was really funny, but...
Because actually, it made me feel sick, and I couldn't continue because it was that split screen thing where your eyes are looking at 2 different, moving images, and we were so hyped for this, and we were like, right, this is going to be this is going to be our crowning achievement at life. We're going to complete Halo together in a day, and it's going to be awesome. And it wasn't. It wasn't. But I'm not a big. I never had an N64, so I wasn't like as hardcore on the GoldenEye game thing as a lot of people. But we should talk about it for like a minute. Like, you guys were hardcore.
I never had a Nintendo 64 either, but my friend Eric had a Nintendo 64, and he would just bring the whole thing over after school, and we would play for hours and hours. And then we would do the invisible mode and put like as many mines next to like a Russian soldier as you could, and they'd blow up. So yeah, I mean that was really one of the first video games that like was set up in such a way that it was almost like vibes. Like you could just redo missions over and over again. It never stopped being fun. And now I feel like it's a source of meme content on the internet. And like people still talk about it. And then there was that Perfect Dark, which was the same game engine that came out a couple years later that just never quite clicked. They never got the glory of this game again. But there are probably people that have played the video game and never seen the movie. Like it's just really, really interesting.
I'd imagine that's
big
very
fan,
true.
big fan of the game.
Well, we're going to move on to our final section of the show, the Double Jeopardy trivia quiz, which we will get into right after this break. And we're back with our final section of the show, the Double Jeopardy trivia quiz, where the scores can really change. Now, hopefully you know the basic rules. 3 questions, 1 clue each time. And Ben, you can choose as the special guest whether you wish to collaborate or compete with Mr. Billingham.
I think 006 and 007 together on a mission. Or what do you think? Yeah? Or go
Let's
against
do it.
each other.
I'm on board.
Okay.
I'm actually on board.
I like it. All right.
I'm alone.
I like
Aren't
it.
we all, Ben?
All right.
Aren't we all?
Okay, guys. Question number 1. Joe Don Baker appears in GoldenEye as CIA agent Jack Wade, an ally of Bond's. But in which 007 film did Baker appear as the villainous arms dealer Brad Whitaker, who was an adversary of Bond's?
Yeah, I know this as a Bond.
Go for it. I think I know, but you go.
Living Daylights
Is
like
correct.
Two films earlier, which is a bit weird casting.
That
isn't
is
it?
Very
weird.
Very weird.
It's weird. I from my head it was Live and Let. No, not Live and Let Die. Yeah, I thought that's the first thing I thought of. But yeah, Living Daylights, of course. Nice.
Living Daylights is correct. Question number 2. How many Bond films in total did Dame Judi Dench appear in?
Ooh. I think it's either 7 or 8.
Is she in all the Brosnans?
She's in all the 4 Brosnans, and then is
Okay.
she in
Skyfall.
That's it. You got to crack.
Casino
You got to get.
Royale.
You got to
Casino
work it
Royale,
out.
she
You've got to
has
work it
to
out.
be
Bit of
in.
maths.
Is she Inspector? Not yeah, Spectre.
well,
No,
she's
she's not Inspector. She can't be Inspector.
There's a video of her, so I don't know if you're counting that. Are you counting that?
He would. This
He
yeah,
would.
Phil's
Look at him,
scrupulous to
look at
say
him,
the
of course
least.
he would.
Yeah.
So in that case, so that's
Is
4. Is it 8 or 9? No,
I think it's got to be.
8.
Is this a trick question? Is she like lady number 3 in like I don't know
that's true.
Diamonds Are Forever or something? So it's 8 then.
8 is the correct answer.
Yes!
Well done, guys. Yeah. GoldenEye,
Wait,
Tomorrow Never
I don't remember
Dies.
her in Quantum of Solace, but I don't revisit Quantum of Solace too.
Well,
often.
apparently, Inspector, it's uncredited, but she did appear in the film. So, yeah, that is the. that
Where
is
are
the
your
correct
guys
answer.
on Spectre? Do you like Spectre?
I liked it because I
liked
love
it,
Christoph
yeah.
Waltz. So I loved him as Blofeld.
I was crushed by it. I was so disappointed after Skyfall. It just I mean, I love Christoph Waltz, don't get me wrong. And like all the elements were there, but I just found myself like it's something about it. It just didn't click for me. I don't know. But that's because I hold Skyfall in such high esteem, maybe? I'm not sure.
I didn't like the brother thing. I thought that was a bit unnecessary.
Yeah,
But
that's true.
I love the fight scene on the train with what's his name? Big guy. That's an amazing fight scene.
Oh,
with that.
Batista?
Yeah, I think that's brilliant.
Yeah,
fight
he's
scene.
great. That guy is
Yeah.
great. Someone's got to write a movie. Phil, write a movie for Dave Batista.
Actually, I have one actually, but
Oh, cool.
yeah, but more on that later off mic. Our final question is coming to you straight from Convoluted Corner. Okay, in previous iterations of the story, the antagonist was known as Augustus Trevelyan, and he was more of a mentor to Bond. 2 distinguished British thespians, both RADA graduates, turned the role down. One was Sir Anthony Hopkins.
Wow.
Who was the other?
Oh,
I mean, I think I know it. Shall I just say it, or do you...
Go
Okay.
for it.
Right?
Go for it, Ben.
Die Hard. He was in Die Hard. I'm trying to make it.
Reginald Vell Johnson? I can't believe it.
No, it was Alan Rickman.
Alan Rickman.
I tried to do an Alan Rickman.
Alan Rickman.
Fantastic.
think
You are
yeah.
absolutely correct. It was Alan Rickman. So once again, and of course he turned the part down because he was tired of playing villains. So yeah, almost
I think Bean
had a
is of
direct
those
crossover.
3. I think Bean is the best choice. Bean is great. It'd be
Perfect.
very strange. I mean, obviously, it would write it differently. I think, but Rickman in this part, as it's written, wouldn't quite. It'd be a nice
Yeah.
difference from Die Hard, but it wouldn't quite like click.
Plus, you would see it coming as well. Like you would see,
you're right.
It'd be so obvious.
You don't see it coming with Bean. That's
You
really
don't.
true.
It's
Yeah,
really
you
believable
do.
that he's just like a lower level grunt in the organization, just a fellow agent that's just like an ass kicker. So it and it's also like believable enough that Bean is not such a superstar. He's obviously like a really, 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 really respected actor, but it's believable he could have been in it for that short part, rather than if you had someone that was so huge and they're like, well, he's coming back. You know what I mean? If he was killed off too soon. So just brilliant choices. This movie's great. It's one of the better Bond films. Pierce Brosnan's fantastic. Bean's fantastic. Famke Janssen is spectacular. So much to love about this film. I think this movie is really, really fun. Thoroughly enjoyed it. Any final thoughts?
I absolutely agree with everything. So I wish they'd kept the tone for the rest of them, like the gritty.
Yeah.
It got a bit too cheesy and frivolous after this. I still like them, but I just think this one is just amazing. It's like best. Yeah, brilliant film.
This is a top 5 Bond movie in my mind, you know,
Yeah.
and I think watching it now, you know, whatever many years on, it validates that. It's not like I was like, oh, I was just a, 13-year-old kid or 12-year-old kid who didn't know any better. Like, we really got a great Bond movie out of this movie.
It's a banger. It's an absolute
it's
banger.
really, really good.
Ben, tell us about what you've got. Thank you so much for coming on the show
Ben,
today.
This is a real pleasure.
This was really fun.
Thank you for having me.
Tell us about what you've got going on.
I was in Seize Them, which is coming out in the UK in April, which is very exciting. I don't know when it's coming out in the US. And I've got a couple of sitcoms coming out as well in April.
Wow.
Again, that'll just be... one of them's going out on Hulu.
Oh, fantastic.
It's called Dinosaur. It's coming out on Hulu and BBC Three. And then I stream Washing Up every Sunday. If you want to see me live streaming me washing up, that's it, for an hour in the morning.
What do you talk about?
Plates, knives, forks, ladles sometimes. I feed the cat.
Whoa.
Yeah.
This is a comedy show called like It's called Washing Up. What's the
I think you just heard the hook, Phil. I think we got it.
It's literally that.
Die Hard in a sink.
It's like for the first 15 minutes he's washing dishes and then German terrorists show up every week.
Can't believe
he's
it,
like,
man.
These guys again. How does the same shit happen to the guy every same Sunday morning?
Well, how do people find it? What would they search for?
Washing Up Club, I think. I'm on Twitch, streaming on Twitch. This is Greensville, and I'll post a link on Twitter saying when I'm coming up. Usually about 10 a.m. It's don't get me wrong, it's rubbish, but I think it's quite funny. I've been doing it for over a year now, every morning for an hour.
And I did see the thing that you did that was absolutely hilarious, where you were pretending to be like a bad Airbnb like host.
Oh yeah.
What was that? Tell us about that.
Oh, that was a kind of hidden camera thing I did for Channel 4 in the UK, and it was Nightmare B&B, a hidden camera. Cameras in every room, and this guy came in. His mate knew it was a prank. The guy didn't, and I had to tell him not to do a shit in the toilet because the original plumbing was there and it couldn't handle it. Then I said, if you do a shit about this big, that's fine. Any bigger, I'll have to come and pick it out and burn it. And it was quite funny, but because he fell for it all the way through. And
see, if I was on that, I would be refusing to let people use my Blu-rays. That would be my cruelty as an Airbnb host.
I don't want to talk about this anymore. That sounds great and hilarious, and I'm going to watch the Washing Up show, even though I guess it will be very late at night here. But I'm going to stay up. I'm going to stay up all night to watch it. It'll be great.
They're also all on YouTube.
Quick plugs as well, haven't we? Oh, excuse me.
Oh, they're on YouTube. Okay, great.
Yeah.
Then we will check them out. We have a few plugs. Phil, give me a plug. Give me a plug.
We've mentioned this a couple of times, but the Eye of the Duck episode that we did about Total Recall is now out.
It's a good episode.
Really, really was such a blast to do. We love those guys. It's a great show. They're doing a season on cyberpunk cinema, and Liam and I are on that show talking about
Ben, where are you on Total Recall?
Love it. I saw it
Nice.
2 weeks. 2 weeks ago. I saw it 2 weeks ago. I was trying to...
Did you actually see it 2 weeks ago, or were you just crowbarring that in the way that
it was a crowbar option.
Okay.
Get your ass to Mars. Get your ass to Mars.
So yeah, you can check that out. I am just finishing up my sort of extended run as a guest Premier League pundit on the American English Soccer podcast. So if you're interested in that, if you're interested in the beautiful game, then you can check out the American English Soccer podcast wherever you get your pods. And that's all I have. Do you guys have anything else to chuck into the mix before we...
No, I'm at Liam G. Billingham on Twitter. The podcast is at DieHardOAB. If you have thoughts on the movies we're talking about, you can email us diehardoab@gmail.com. That's really all I have. I don't talk about sports on podcasts because I don't know anything about sports. So I just leave that to the professionals like Phil. Now, Phil, you are working really closely with Elon Musk on updates to X. That's correct. You're really
we're
digging
working
in
on.
there.
We're gonna take a rocket to Mars, a la Total Recall.
Get your ass to Mars, Elon. Like, go.
Yeah. No, I am on Twitter. Basically, what I like to do on Twitter is see if, post something that I think is interesting, and then as a test, see how few likes I can get on it. And generally, it's 0. So, for example, today I posted 2 what I thought were pretty interesting tweets, and
what were they about?
0 impact. Both of them were about soccer.
Oh.
One of them was about the BBC's take on Major League Soccer.
Guys, please go retweet Phil. Please go retweet him.
It was about a player that just passed away.
You know, we did just get a retweet from our good old friend Russell Crowe.
Yeah, we did, yeah.
Who retweeted our conversation about the film Land of Bad and the interview we did with the director of that film, William Eubank. So we're getting some attention. We're doing good. Russell Crowe likes us.
Some people like us. Yeah.
What he tweets echoes in eternity, so we got to keep our eyes on it at all times.
What's next on the show, Liam?
Next time on the show, Nick of Time, Christopher Walken, being a baddie.
Have you ever seen this one, Ben? You ever seen Nick of Time?
No, I haven't.
With Johnny Depp?
Is that the one in real time?
It's Die Hard in real time. It's it's good. It's a really solid thriller. John
Pretty
Badham.
cool,
This is a
Hitchcockian, semi-political thriller.
I think I've got it on DVD.
It's going to be really fun. It's a fun episode.
Got to watch it. We'll give
You
it
need
a
to
watch.
get your SCART cable sorted out, though. Make sure it's on the right,
ridiculous.
right format.
Phil won't lend it to you. Just keep that in mind.
All right, guys.
Thank you, Ben. This was a real pleasure. We'll be back next time with Christopher Walken's mustache.
Bye, guys.
Die Hard on a Blank is a podcast created and hosted by Philip Gawthorne. Liam Billingham co-hosts and produces the show. Mike Mayer and Michael Sugar are the executive producers. Find us on Twitter and Instagram at DieHardOAB. Rate, review, follow the show wherever you get your podcasts. Most importantly, tell your movie podcast-loving friends about Die Hard on a Blank. See you next time on Die Hard on a Blank.